Already like this, a little bit better feel. Feels like we're gonna have like a nice divide between 9 and 10:30. This is good. I don't know whose idea 11:30 was, but that was bad. We're done with that. All right, we're gonna be in Genesis. We're gonna start off in Genesis chapter 8 this morning, but we're gonna kind of bounce around. So this is kind of part two of the story of the flood. So if you remember, we looked at it last week, and God had flooded the entire earth, and we kind of we zoomed out to look at the entirety of that situation, assessing, as some might today, was this justified? Should God be flooding the entire world and saving only 8 people? And hopefully you left with the confidence that of a resounding yes. The description in Genesis 6 verse 5, that every thought was only evil all the time out of the entirety of humanity, that the entire world had become corrupt and violent rather than the good world that God had created. And as any good judge would do, as any authority figure would do, once corruption is discovered, it must be rooted out, right? God can't be good if he allows corruption to pervade. But we also learned last week that it wasn't just judgment for the wicked, but it was also salvation, that Noah and his family experienced this blessing from God, that this corruption and judgment and violence actually brought grief to the heart of God. That while we look on at the violence of the world and we feel some level of grief in our heart, we go to bed just fine, and we wake up and continue on just fine. All of the evil in the world brings grief to the heart of God, even more so than us. And so how much more qualified is he to render his judgment on what he sees? Well, this week we're going to continue to look at the story and really dive in on this covenant that God makes with Noah. What is it about? What exactly is he promising Noah? And what can we gather from it as well? And so I'm going to pick it up in Genesis chapter 8, verse 20, and we will read through chapter 9, verse 17. The floodwaters had subsided. Noah's now on dry land. Verse 20. Then Noah built an altar to the Lord and took some of every clean animal and some of every clean bird and offered burnt offerings on the altar. And when the Lord smelled the pleasing aroma, the Lord said in his heart, I will never again curse the ground because of man. For the intention of man's heart is evil from his youth. Neither will I again strike down every living creature as I have done. While the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease. And God blessed Noah and said to his sons and said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. The fear of you and the dread of you shall be upon every beast of the earth and upon every bird of the heavens, upon everything that creeps on the ground and all the fish of the sea. Into your hand they are delivered. Every moving thing that lives shall be food for you. And as I gave you the green plants, I give you everything. But you shall not eat flesh with its life, that is, its blood. And for your lifeblood I will require a reckoning. From every beast I will require it, and from man. For his fellow man I will require a reckoning for the life of man. Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed. For God made man in his own image. And you, be fruitful and multiply, increase greatly on the earth and multiply in it. Then God said to Noah and his sons with him, behold, I establish my covenant with you and your offspring after you, and with every living creature that is with you, the birds, the livestock, and every beast of the earth with you. As many as came out of the ark, it is for every beast of the earth. I establish my covenant with you, and never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of the flood, and never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth. And God said, this is the sign of the covenant that I make between me and you and every living creature that is with you for all future generations. I have set my bow in the cloud, and it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. When I bring clouds over the earth and the bow is seen in the clouds, I will remember my covenant that is between me and you and every living creature of all flesh. And the water shall never again become a flood to destroy all flesh. When the bow is in the clouds, I will see it and remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that is on the earth. And God said to Noah, this is the sign of the covenant that I have established between me and all flesh that is on the earth. This is the word of the Lord. Let's pray together. Father, we thank you for the warning that is the flood. To be warned is a grace in and of itself. We know that another judgment is coming. And we thank you for the salvation that's available in the ark of Jesus on the cross, applying atonement to us so that we might be saved by faith. And so I pray that for us this morning. One, thankfulness and gratitude for those who have received it. And I pray that you would extend that blessing to those who yet have not. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, at its core, marriage itself is a covenant. It's a lifelong promise between two people. This is why oftentimes when I do weddings, I'll emphasize traditional vows. You can listen to them here. Hear the covenantal language. I, Gavin, take you, Bridget, to be my wedded wife. I do promise and covenant before God and these witnesses to be your loving and faithful husband, for richer or for poorer, mostly poorer, in joy and in sorrow. Maybe the richness is coming later. We're rich in blessings from God. In joy and in sorrow, in sickness and in health, as long as we both shall live. It's extensive. It's comprehensive. This is the entirety of our lives. No matter what happens, I am bound to you and you are bound to me. This is not consequential. Circumstances can't dictate this promise, but rather we have made a covenant with one another that is unbreakable. And it's symbolized by the wearing of wedding rings, at least in our culture. And so in easy times, the feelings of love and affection might be enough to get by, right? A dating relationship, two people who like each other. When times aren't tough, as long as I love you and you love me and we feel good about it, that's more than enough to get me through those times. But when things become dark and exceedingly difficult, it's the covenant that keeps you together. When the feelings have subsided, when they're hard to awaken, when the antithetical feelings arise, like I really don't like you right now. It's the covenant that keeps you together. That's why marriage partly reveals the mystery of Christ's love for his church. There's much dark times for the church. There's many struggles and sufferings that we go through. Our feelings of affection toward Jesus is not what keeps us bound to the covenant, but rather his faithfulness and the promise that he's made to each of us. It is an everlasting covenant. And it's this kind of committed, everlasting relationship that God enters into willingly with us. And so today I want to look at the nature of this covenant that God makes with Noah, and particularly what it means for us. I've got 5 things I want to look at. Number 1, the fact that God is a gracious God. Secondly, the fact that God is a God of all creation. Third, God is a God of all life. Fourth, God is a God of the whole family. And then fifth, God is a God who remembers. Number 1, God is a gracious God. After telling Noah his plan to flood the entire earth, God enters into a covenant with Noah. This is Genesis 6, verse 18. I will establish my covenant with you. You shall come into the ark, you, your sons, your wife, and your sons' wives with you. We touched on this a little bit last week, but I want to give a greater description to it. A common misconception is that because Noah is righteous, then God chose to bless him. It's as if God scanned the entire world, looked for a righteous person, saw Noah like doing tithes or something, or helping a neighbor, and then God was like, he's got it. That's the one. I'll save him and his family. But that's not true, and the text actually tells you that. If you look with me at Genesis chapter 6, the entire book of Genesis is divided into 10 sections called Toledotes. And these sections are focused on the generations of a particular individual. So in other words, the section begins with the words, these are the generations of. For example, Genesis 1 through chapter 2, verse 3 is kind of an introduction to Genesis, and you could argue kind of an introduction to the entire Bible. Genesis 2:4 begins with these words. These are the generations of the heavens and the earth. And so I know that from Genesis 2:4 on through Genesis 6:7, that section is all about the generations of the heavens and the earth. You'll notice that in Genesis chapter 6, verse 8, where that section ends, it says this, Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. That's the closing statement of the first section, the generations of the heavens and the earth. Genesis 6:9 starts a brand new section. These are the generations of Noah. And then we are told that Noah was a righteous man, blameless in his generation. It's hard to see because it's all in the same chapter, right? Genesis 6. And naturally we think that the way the chapters are divided is the way that we should read it. But it's important that you remember that this isn't the way it was written in the original language. The chapter and verse divisions came later. And so we find out that Noah found favor in God's eyes before the end of Adam's section. The Noah as a righteous man comes after in an entirely different section. And sorry, I said that the section from 2:4 ends in 6:8. It actually ends in the end of Genesis 4, and then Genesis 5 starts a new section. The description of Noah as a righteous man comes after all of that. And so in other words, Noah didn't find favor because he was righteous, but even the reading of the text is telling you he found favor in the eyes of the Lord, he received grace, and then righteousness ensued after that. That the reception of grace transformed Noah into a righteous man. And again, we read later on in the story that it doesn't make him totally righteous. The very first thing he does is he finds dry land, he plants a vineyard, says there's nobody else around, Netflix doesn't exist, can't hang out with my friends, let me just sip on this wine all day. And before you know it, he loses his clothes and he's still drinking and his kids are embarrassed. Although I don't know what they were embarrassed about. There was nobody else, so I feel like it's cool. Anyway. And herein lies the graciousness of our God, right? So God enters into a covenant with this undeserving man. He does that with us, entering into covenants with undeserving people. Genesis 6:11, may I remind you, says that the world was filled with violence. Everyone had corrupted their way on the earth, according to 6:12. Violence and corruption, we just discussed this, they deserve justice and punishment, right? Violence and corruption doesn't deserve to run rampant, but we've got to shut that down or you can't have a livable society. Yet God wanted to make a way to preserve mankind. And so even though there's no righteous people, there's no deserving people, God enters into a covenant with Noah anyway. Secondly, God initiates the covenant with unwilling people. So this isn't like Noah or anybody else was searching for God and God made himself available, but rather Genesis 6:5 says that every intention was only evil all the time. Thoughts are selfish. Thoughts are wicked. In Matthew chapter 24, Jesus refers back to the flood, and this is what he says. He says that the people at that time continued on eating and drinking, marrying and being given in marriage, unaware, no greater description of humanity even now. Every thought, only evil all the time. We're eating, we're drinking, we're marrying, we're being given in marriage with no concern about the judgment that is to come. Doesn't enter our minds. And yet God, seeing the unwillingness of people to pursue him, pursues us and initiates covenant with us. Third, God keeps the covenant with guilty people. See, this last point is more of an inference than a conclusion, but my point here is that God's kept his covenant promises, hasn't he? He said he'd never flood the earth again. Guess what hasn't happened? He hasn't flooded the earth. He said he would keep the seasons, seed time and harvest, day and night, summer, winter, autumn, spring. I can't even remember them all because we just have one season all year, hot and not that hot, right? God has kept his promises. Considering the world's guilt and unwillingness to follow God, it really is an act of tremendous grace Number one, that God saves anyone. And number two, that you and I are still here. I don't think we get a full picture of that. The wickedness that prevails amongst us and in us, and the graciousness of God to allow second chances and enter into a covenant with us. Second, God is a God of all creation. One of the common ancient beliefs, and still somewhat common in today's society, is that spirit is good, but the physical world is bad. And so to be righteous, to be holy, to be pious is to depart and forsake the physical and enter into the spiritual. The Bible is very different in this regard. In fact, the Bible isn't the only flood narrative in existence. You've probably heard of the Epic of Gilgamesh and other writings. Yet what makes the biblical story unique is that this flood includes the redemption and preservation of the physical world. Most of the other flood accounts carries with it the purpose of wiping out the physical so that the spiritual may remain. Separate the body, which is bad, so that the spirit, which is good, can thrive. That is not the flood of Genesis 6 through 9. Rather, God sees it as all worthy of redemption, our body and our soul. Genesis 8:21 through 22, which I read already, says this: I will never again curse the ground because of man, neither will I again strike down every living creature as I have done, while the earth remains. He's talking about the earth. He's entering into a covenant with dirt and trees and the stars and the sun. Seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer, winter, day, night, none of it shall cease. God's saying that the physical world is going to be redeemed. And therefore, the gospel is such good news, not just because bad people get forgiven, but because a corrupt world gets redeemed. That what God made good, that man corrupted, God is going to consummate in something that's even more beautiful than before. I'll never forget the way that I felt the first time I heard of Jonestown, that massacre in the 1970s. If you're unfamiliar with it, the People's Temple was a cult started by a man by the name of Jim Jones. And he established this cult in the United States of America and brought his followers to a remote area of Guyana. And the way the massacre occurred is he convinced these people that they needed to depart from this physical world and enter into a spiritual one, and that he would provide them opportunity to do so. Well, the aftermath was 900 plus people drinking cyanide poison or being injected with it in a promise that they would depart from this world and head to a new spiritual one. We know what really happened. It was mass murder by a psychopath. That wasn't entrance into a spiritual world. The Christian with the mind redeemed by Jesus Christ recognizes the error in that already. God made this world good. He doesn't want us to depart from it. Rather, he redeemed us and saved us and made us a new creation and put us on this world so that we can participate in its redemption, that we might reflect it to the rest of creation. Jesus did not come to take us out of this world, but to invite us in his mission to redeem the one in which we live. This is a promise we're meant to hold on to. And so when we see situations like Hurricane Ian tearing through the West Coast, it's good to remember that God has promised that these things will cease. When we see wildfires in California, tornadoes in the Midwest, maybe it's even the weeds in your lawn, as annoying as those things are, remember that God is a gracious God who keeps his promises with the ground. All of this will be redeemed to be a beautiful planet that reflects his glory and his beauty rather than sin which pervades through it. Third, our God is a God of all life. If the physical world matters to God, so do the people who inhabit it. Genesis 9:6 is a verse that we should all have in our back pockets. Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed, for God made man in his own image. Statement is a repudiation of the violence in Genesis 6 and Lamech's boast about being vengeful in Genesis 4. In other words, human life is incredibly valuable to God. See, to be clear, it isn't enough that we just not kill people, right? Have you heard that statement? I'm a good guy. I haven't killed anyone. Like what a low bar that is, right? No one comes home proud to, like, honey, I didn't kill anybody today. You got Did you make dinner? Can we go to Chili's? The real standard is this: to preserve life with the same sacrificial effort that God did. It's not enough to just not kill people, but what are we doing to actively preserve life? And I'll say this: there's a spirit in the air these last few years of fighting for the rights for people that's really championed by the world. And what's absent from that rhetoric is the recognition that God has made all people in his image. And that's our motivation for preserving life. Not because it's cool, not because it's a slogan, not because your favorite celebrity is doing it, not because you don't want to get canceled on social media, but because God has made all people in his image, and therefore we fight to preserve life. God came and got Noah and his family. God would later send his son Jesus to actually pay the cost for this salvation. When he could have eliminated all life for the corruption and violence that deserved it, God instead went to unimaginable lengths to make sure that life was preserved. And it's this example that you and I are compelled to follow. This means that come Tuesday of this week, midterm voting, if you're participating in that, that's got to be part of your mindset. Policies that threaten the lives of maybe undocumented children, that matters in preserving life. Policies that threaten the lives of unborn children matter in preserving life. Policies aimed at addressing overcriminalization matter in preserving life. Policies in healthcare, gun rights, all of these things matter in preserving life. Our faith is not antithetical to the policies and people that we vote for, but it's got to enter into that conversation. Now, good luck trying to figure out that web, right? There's different politicians that represent, different spectrums of all of those things. But we as Christians, we stand for the preservation of life. And that's got to be the motivation, not the talking points of some politician, not some ridiculous commercial bashing the other side. Do you know that this politician hates people and wants them all dead? All right, come on now. That's probably not true. Let's use our brains as Christians and figure out what God would want us to do in preserving life. And I understand that may land you on one side or the other, but the point is that we've got to work vehemently the way God worked so hard to send Jesus Christ to die for us. I think this even extends to our own personal health. Gluttony, laziness, these are sins as well. God cares about body and soul, physical and spiritual. We need to be about preserving life. It all matters to God. And his promise to us is that he will redeem everything. The world, the people of the world, our bodies that exist on this world, all of it will remain when Jesus Christ returns. And therefore, we need to represent and reflect that. Fourth, God is a God of the whole family. Not only is God passionate about all of creation and the preservation of life, but his grace extends to entire families. You'll notice throughout this account from Genesis chapter 6, beginning in verse 5, all the way through the end in 9:17, God repeats 7 times that Noah, his sons, his wives, his sons' wives are all a part of this covenantal blessing. In Genesis 6:8, it was just Noah who found favor. Look at it again. Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. It wasn't Noah and his kids and their wives and his wife finding favor. It was Noah. God was gracious to him. And in his grace to him, he saved the entire family. That's not an inconsequential detail. What do we make of this? I think number one, God's grace is for you and your family. You have to resist the tendencies of such an individualistic culture that we live in, where we've made even faith just this personal thing that we do. I read the Bible, I pray, I have a relationship with God. If it affects you, it affects you. If it doesn't, it doesn't. Far be it from me to offend you with my faith. That's not how it works. Turn faith into this private deal between you and Jesus, but it's important that you know that this isn't God's heart. God's heart is for the entirety of your family. Your relationship needs to be your family's relationship with God. And so find creative and consistent ways to pursue Jesus together. And you leave your family behind. Talk about spiritual things together as a family. As of right now, the kids are in there learning Genesis chapters 10 and 11, the Tower of Babel. We'll preach on that next week. There's common ground, common conversation. In the van, taking the kids to school, or before going to bed at night with your spouse, or watching TV, or as you watch TV and you're seeing theological themes emerge from the programming that you're taking in, have conversations about those things. Your faith is not your own. Your faith is you and your families. Commit to serving together as a family. It's not just God's call on one person. I'm going to go and serve the church. This is my call and leave you behind. No, we're doing this together. How can we together serve our church community in the name of God? Second, God's covenant sign is for you and your family. You'll notice that the rainbow in the clouds isn't just for Noah. Noah's not the only guy who leaves the boat, and then when there's a rainstorm, he sees the rainbow, and his kids are like, Dad, what are you looking at? We don't see anything. The rainbow's there for all to see. It's for all of creation. And more specifically, it's for Noah and his family. 1 Peter 3, we talked about this a little bit last week, particularly links baptism with the flood. And he says, or Peter says, that baptism saves us in our unity with Christ. Now, he doesn't mean literally as you get into the water or have the water poured over you that something magical happens and salvation occurs. But rather, baptism is a sign that signifies your unity and your family's unity with Jesus Christ. Therefore, when we look at baptism, it's a sign of God's blessings to the believer and his or her entire family. It's not so much your personal commitment to Jesus. I think that's a misapplication of what baptism is. We tend to teach it that way. This is me declaring to the world my commitment to Jesus. How long is that going to last, right? You're going to have an evil thought in the next 10 minutes, right? That's not what we're declaring. I'm committed to Jesus. No, you're not. He's committed to you, and that's what baptism is about. Instead, baptism, again, Jesus' commitment to us. And lastly, number 3, what we learn with God being a God of grace to Noah and his family is that there is a representative head of household and that he has a big responsibility. Because God's grace extends to Noah and his family, his sins will have an important consequence on them as well. All of it matters. When Noah sins against God, his family is going to feel the ramifications of that. Dads are the first and ideal spiritual authority in the home. Now, again, we recognize the same weight and responsibility exists for the single mother or the single father or children being raised by aunts and uncles, whatever the family structure there is. The head of the household has a spiritual responsibility to impart that wisdom to all who are under their care. And we have to take that seriously. Well, lastly, God is a God who remembers. Let me read this last section for you again so you can hear it afresh. Genesis 9, beginning in verse 13. God declares this to Noah and to all people. I have set my bow in the cloud. It shall be a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. When I bring clouds over the earth and the bow is seen in the clouds, I will remember my covenant that is between me and you and every living creature of all flesh. And the water shall never again become a flood to destroy all flesh. When the bow is in the clouds, I will see it and remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that is on the earth. And God said to Noah, this is the sign of the covenant that I have established between me and all flesh that is in the earth. Again, we often think about the rainbow in the sky as a way for us to remember God's promises. I've taught it that way. When you see the rainbow in the sky, remember your commitment to God and remember that He is for you. The reverse is true. A rainbow is a sign of God's remembering us. Maybe that seems like an insignificant detail, but it isn't. God's covenant is about the promises He keeps to you, not the other way around. I opened this by talking about the marriage covenant. That's the way a wedding ring functions, doesn't it? I don't look at my wedding ring and remember a promise that I made to my wife. My grand thought are really 2 things. The fact that God brought me such a wonderful person to whom I am married, and the fact that she promised to love and covenant to me. And here we are bound together. And so when you see that rainbow in the sky, when you look to the baptism that you received, Don't start thinking about your personal commitment and feelings toward God. But remember, he has not forgotten you. His promises still stand. As he has been faithful to Israel, to Noah, to Abraham, to David, so he will be faithful to you, because that's the kind of God that he is. And so the core of the gospel is that God saves us. And even when we rebel against him, still, after having received grace, God keeps us. None of it is dependent on what we do or what we don't do. In times of personal suffering, remember God's promises to you. Things are rough at work. Things are rough at home. When you're in your own spiritual rut, you just can't seem to connect to God. You're reading your Bible, you're getting absolutely nothing out of it. You're praying and you're falling asleep, trailing off, feeling like I prayed the same prayer over and over and over again. Frustrated, down on myself. It's not your ability to continue to do this well. Doesn't it feel that way sometimes? Man, I wasted that Bible study. I didn't get anything out of it. Man, my prayers trailed off. Sorry, God. Thanks be to God that my prayers aren't dependent on how well I did it. Sometimes I come up here and pray, and I'm like, man, you just said that prayer last week. Do better. Thanks be to God that the prayers of New Springs Church aren't sustained by my articulate ability to say them well, but it's because God's made a promise to you to sustain you. In times of global suffering, remember God's promises to the world. As we look on at wars in other lands and natural disasters that wipe people out, the oppression we talked about last week that was going on and continues to go on in the nation of Brazil, remember that God has promised to redeem all of that too. If you're like me, sometimes I sit back and I watch those things and I say, it's too much to even think about. And if I'm honest, I'll press escape. Let me get out of this. I don't want to think about it anymore. Let me find some TV to watch that's more encouraging to my soul. And even though I want to detach and escape and get away from pain, God stays in it and promises to redeem it. And lastly, in times of family suffering, we don't know where Noah's sons' hearts were. Could have thought their dad was crazy building this boat. We don't know where his wife was at, where their wives were at, what their relationship was like with God. But because God chose to be gracious to Noah, the entire family benefited. And so remember God's promise to your entire house. The kids are misbehaving. You and your spouse aren't getting along. Finances have become troublesome. Remember God's promise to you, to sustain you, to redeem you, to be your God and you to be his people. In this world of great trouble that probably won't cease at any point soon, as the days go on, so do the troubles that come with it. But as the days go on, so is the God who made them. And so remember the promises he's made to you and let that sustain you and carry you on each day and every day. Let's pray. God, it goes completely against the grain that you would make promises to us. This is not how we operate. We tend to make promises to people that we like and have already been faithful to us and have demonstrated their worthiness of our promises. Yeah, you do the exact opposite. We're undeserving, we're unwilling, and continuously guilty as the days go on. Yet because of the redemption purchased by Jesus Christ on the cross, you keep us and you make us new. And so I ask God that we would learn that lesson every day. Make us a repentant people. That as we recognize the guilt and sinfulness within us, that we would have the confidence to come to the throne of grace, to confess to you, knowing that we will confidently receive your grace and your forgiveness. And I pray that that gives us the power and the confidence to walk each day. Let us not see suffering for what it is, but let us see the God behind it, that these are temporary, momentary, and light afflictions, but our great God is powerful enough to overcome them. And our great God has guaranteed to overcome them. Let this confidence in your promises sustain us, Lord. In Jesus' name, amen.